Leadership Story Talks, where we discuss the practices that engage, motivate, develop, retain, and attract people to businesses. We'll give you principles and tools based on real-world stories to leverage listening and storytelling to become a better leader and management professional. Leadership Story Talks is produced by Narativ, a company that focuses on personal storytelling for business.
Welcome to Leadership Story Talks. In this podcast, which comes to you from Narativ, Julienne, Ryan, and myself, Jerome, discuss ways in which we can create more engagement in our lives, especially at work. There are more people today who identify as disengaged at work than there are who say they feel engaged. We come from Narativ, which is a company that focuses on engaging businesses and their audiences through the power of listening and storytelling, employing a 7-step method to do so. And today it's me and Jules. Hi, Jules.
Hi there. Very good to see you again.
Good to see you too. And we're going to be talking about onboarding because it came into the fore very recently, and we thought this would be an interesting topic to bring to our listeners today.
Well, you were on a panel yesterday, a live real-time panel with a lot of people who are involved in the art and science of onboarding. So I'm curious to see what some of your takeaways were about what you learned and how the group experienced you, which was something very interesting to watch during the presentation.
Yeah. So I was asked to be on a panel specifically to talk about onboarding, and the topic was presented as, what can we do to overhaul our onboarding? So the assumption that was made was that there's a problem with onboarding, and so I was joined by two other speakers on this panel, and it was moderated by someone from the company Culture Amp, and that looks at all these things around engagement and is really prominent in the field of building cultures in companies and helping them do that. So it was great for me to be there, just in terms of being the one person that was talking about storytelling as a way of disrupting a little bit how we see onboarding. That's always how I've seen it. I told this story, which I'll repeat here. My first day coming into a job in Hong Kong, right out of business school. Actually, it was right out of an internship that I did at business school. But this was really my first job out of business school. And I got to, the 15th floor of this beautiful glass tower building overlooking the Hong Kong harbor. And I can see, where my desk is. And then this person greets me very warmly and says, "Welcome." And she says, "Oh, we're not going to go right away to your desk. If you could follow me, please, that would be great." And she was the HR director. And so I followed her down this corridor, and gradually the corridor got darker and darker until we got to a windowless. Yeah, that's right. Until we got to a windowless conference room with just 2 chairs. And she told me, have a seat. And there were 2 binders on the table. One said employee handbook and the other one said compliance. And she says, you've got 48 hours to go through that. So I did. And it wasn't about it was another week until I finally met a human being that was related to my job and to this organization. So I told that story because it really has influenced how I view onboarding. And what I noticed in that company as well is that every few months people would quit. And later on, much later on, I kind of realized that engagement wasn't happening from day one. There wasn't that human element. And yes, you have to go through the compliance and the admin stuff, and you have to learn the technical things that are relevant to your job. But if you don't have that balance with the human element and you're not meeting the right people very quickly, A, it's going to be very hard to be productive. And B, it's going to be hard to be engaged and to understand what is this culture, what are these values that are driving it. And that on the long term can really have negative effects, to the point where people leave. And that was my case too. I eventually left that job, and, that was a big reason for it. So that's kind of where we started out the conversation.
And before we pivot back to the panel yesterday, it resonated with everybody, and it was the most referenced 2 binders in the history of mankind, because we kept using that example during the session. But thirdly, it was such an interesting case study, because that is such a vulnerable time for a new hire to decide, did I do the right thing? Because a lot of times they're still being courted or weighing other offers. So the fact that they put you in isolation and questioning your existence for those 2 weeks while you read compliance information really
Yeah.
was not the best tactic. So, but you know, we're all for the better because it drove you to do more interesting things as you move forward. So go
Right.
on. Like, it was an interesting marriage of technology and the human, and I felt like there was a great give and take about what the values of each of those components are. So
Yeah.
interesting to hear your feedback.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. And I also think that, what I took away from it was a kind of a reinforcement of
Mm,
the fact that onboarding is one element of the employee
mhm,
experience, and it's a really key and critical moment because at that moment in time, people are in general pretty
mm,
engaged because they're excited to be there, they're open to learning, and they want to do well. And so, the job of the organization and the leadership is to give people the tools to do their jobs well, but also to kind of understand, what is the broader context here? What's the purpose? Why do we do this? And why do you do this? Why are you here today? And I think one of the things that we talked about was that it's a two-way street. We often think
mm,
of onboarding as I'm the new hire and I'm just receiving information, a bunch of it, and it's kind of overwhelming. And I meet lots of people. You maybe remember one or two of them, and who knows who you're going to meet again and who's going to be, influential in your job and who's going to support you. You find that out kind of gradually. But onboarding tends to be this onslaught of information and people. And rather, what I thought was interesting here is that we talked a lot about the idea that it's a two-way street in terms of we also want to hear from the new hire. Give an indication that your leadership is there to listen. That yes, I'm going to give you some information, but I'm also going to listen to your story, to your values. What kind of culture do you come from that you're going to bring to my culture over here in my company, right? That's a really important element of it. Tactical things that we talked about too, I thought were interesting for those who are listening and are looking at onboarding in particular and ways to engage people. There were some people that said that, it's pretty rare to do any kind of engagement survey until you're 3 months, 6 months, sometimes even a year into your job. And so some people said, why not do a 90-day engagement survey, so you can actually see what the impact of your onboarding is. Because one other statistic that was given is that people who, I think it's 65 or 60, almost 70% of people who go through a great onboarding experience will still be in that company 3 years later, as opposed to those who don't go through a great onboarding experience, they won't be in that company. And sometimes there was even a chart that they showed it's even a year in that they'll be gone. And that was more than half of new hires. So I think, these are important. I say all these statistics because it's kind of like, I'm preaching to everyone that's listening that it's really important to look at this because it's having a real effect on retention, on people's engagement at work. And it's such a huge problem right now, to be able to keep people in and to keep them engaged. So I think we really, learned a lot of different kind of tactics and strategies to keep those people engaged from day one.
My expression in recruiting when I was doing recruiting or working with staff is the experience you're creating. If this is the first date, what's the rest of the marriage is going to be like? Because that first moment is when you're supposed to put all your positive energies and be on your best behavior and showing. And if it's wonky, that doesn't bode well for the whole experience. I want you to go back though to something that had come up and you inferred a few minutes ago about how the new hire is experiencing the organization, because that's the point where their peers can gather a lot of information because they're going in with clear sight. They see things in fresh ways. They haven't been immersed into the organization. And that's a terrific time to pull feedback for them and how they've experienced the hiring process, how they experience some of the way things are done from the get-go, and
Yeah.
engage them right away. And what we've talked about offline is onboarding is not just for the new hire. It re-engages everybody in the departments and the organization if it's done right.
Yeah, I mean, to be really specific about it,
Mm.
I think that, bringing storytelling to the process of onboarding is helpful, because that's what you're wanting as a new hire. You want to hear the stories. You want to hear the stories from real people about what it's like to work in that company. Now, maybe you got a little bit of an experience of that during the interview process, depending on
Mhm.
who was interviewing you, the culture, et cetera. But once you get in, again, it's about getting all this information, and a lot of it is compliance and administrative and technical, and it's quite overwhelming. And so,
Yes.
to me, the way that storytelling comes in is that you're both receiving, ideally, you're receiving stories from people who've been in your shoes, not just the inspirational speech by the CEO that's been recorded, or maybe it's a TED talk and you watch that as part of your, and it's important. I really don't want to minimize that, but I think equally important is to hear from people who've been there, and where it's relevant to your job, and their perspective on what it's like to be there is relevant to how you're going to end up having a sense of belonging at the end of the day. And so I think hearing those kinds of stories, that's where, our process really helps, the onboarding, kind of management. And then the other way around, where now, once you've heard those stories as a new hire, there's a space for you to tell your story in response to that, to say to that manager, here's how I received all these stories that I got. And so one of the things that we've done with clients is we've actually built that in. So we've recorded
Mm.
stories from people who've been in the shoes of the new hires, and they tell stories about likely situations that they're going to encounter. And they also tell stories about how they live the values of the organization. Those are kind of the two things that we focus on. And then once they've done that, then there's space that's created with their managers, and they'll have a conversation, 30-minute conversation with their manager about the impact of those stories and what now they're curious about. And we're even training the managers to ask questions so that they get that information you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
To get the information from the new hire. What are you getting? What's happening with you right now? As opposed to just, here's all the information, go do your job, and we'll talk in a couple of months when you've digested all of it.
And the important part too, because I've used it in interviews and I've used it in what you're describing, is it's not all flowers and butterflies. You got to give real stories, and that helps build trust. If the organization or the managers are giving real good case studies of it, this is what's going wrong, this is what we're in the midst of, this is how we're dealing with it, and here's some bit of positive forward steps we've done, that gets more buy-in. And that builds trust, where you're saying, okay, they're willing to be aware, they're telling me some truths, and this is a good thing. So I
Yeah.
think that's such a, and also as your managers who are training to tell them are able to look at what the situation is with a fresh eye as well. So there's a lot of wins, I think, with the art of using those tools to get people to buy in and start to create some connection and bonds with their team members, whether they're right in their space or whether they're working virtually. And actually, moreover, when they're working virtually now, to keep building on the human connection.
Mhm. And if you look at onboarding not as an isolated event
Mm.
that has to happen because that's how we welcome people and these are the things they need to learn about, but rather as part of your entire engagement, kind of strategy for your
Mm.
employees and part of their employee experience, then you'll see, and we've seen this with our one of our clients, where the managers were the new hires. And so they heard stories from their managers at the time when they came into this company. And then a year later, they're the ones telling stories to the new hires. But they were told that as part of the new hire process and the onboarding process, that they could be in a year or maybe even sooner, the ones that are telling stories to the new hires. And that again creates a sense of like, oh, there's a perspective here. I'm being welcomed into this organization from the get-go, not just, oh, in a month I'll meet the right people, or in 2 months I'll see the right case study, or in 3 months I'll be over here. It's like right away you're put into this situation where, no, I get an opportunity to meet people, but I also get a sense of where I might be in a year.
Mhm.
And it doesn't
Right.
have to I think the other thing that we discussed a lot on this panel was, the idea that this might be very, we don't want to put too many things in that first week, that first month, and you don't have to, because what I'm talking about now, it's really, 3 to 5 stories that you listen to, and they're 5 minutes each. And then, it's a 30-minute conversation with a manager as a result of that. And it's just a few announcements, around here's what's going to happen in a year, in 2 years, and we have examples of that. So I think also, wanted to just kind of dispel the myth that onboarding has to be this sort of huge monolith that you're trying to move. And a lot of times people think, well, you know what, it's not worth it. It's fine to just have people go through compliance and admin and technical stuff, but you can start to make, little inroads, maybe start incrementally, and start to pepper your onboarding with some key stories.
Yeah, try not to break them with all the administrivia first, pepper it, like you said, with some good insight, especially when you're having meetings. There's the battle of all the phrases and the buzzwords. Translate some of that into some context with a story and example, so that person can relate and feel like they're part of it. I think that's it. So key takeaway from your experience traveling to another corner of cyberspace on that panel, what was your key takeaway to give everyone?
I mean, I think really, just repeating a little bit this, but what I alluded to earlier is that onboarding, start to see it as your entire engagement strategy for your employees. Don't just see it as an isolated event. That's number one. Number two, start to measure it as an engagement activity much sooner than you would. So those engagement surveys, don't wait for 6 months to do them. I loved the takeaway of 90 days. I think that's a great kind of principle. Mm-hmm. And number three, the storytelling strategy or process to enter into it. So maybe as a very specific thing that you could do is, start identifying the people who've been in the shoes of your new hires. And if it's a completely new role, new position, identify the people who really live the values of your organization, and start to collect those stories and start to record them. So I think those steps of just identify people, then collect stories, record them, and start to put that into your onboarding process as a welcoming tool, just that, and see what the impact is. And again, listen right away, to what's going on with the new hire, see how they're receiving it.
And that word, I was going to put my 2 cents in, but you helped start it, is don't underestimate the power of listening. A few minutes listening, a touch base, human contact can make all the difference. You're not going to solve everything in one day or in somebody's experience, but the fact you showed up, acknowledge that person, and listen is a big key to success and onboarding.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, hopefully our listeners have taken away some good strategies and even some tactics here today. I love talking about onboarding. It's dear to my heart because of that story that I told you earlier.
The 2 binders.
Yeah, exactly. 2 binders. Exactly. That's going to be my. It's probably going to end up on our logo soon. but yeah, if you all want to learn more about specifically what we do in the onboarding space with storytelling, go to our website, narativ.com, narativ.com, for information on that. You can see it in our blog, you can see it in our podcast, and we are going to be posting a recording of this panel that I participated in, so you'll also benefit from other people's perspectives on this. And as always, if you want to know how you can find, craft, and present the stories that are going to engage your audiences like nothing else has before, you should definitely reach out to us and subscribe to our podcast. If you're not a subscriber yet, just click that subscription button wherever you get your podcasts. We are ready to listen to you and for you to bring us your own challenges and questions. Thanks so much. And thanks, Jules, for being here once again and being a great listener. All right, take care.
For more information on the narrative listening and storytelling method and how it can help your business, go to narativ.com.